I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, hanging out with a friend for a couple of days. Parked up in the cul-de-sac near her house, and it's very, very quiet, very, very peaceful. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell, and please give us a like and leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought of the video. We're going to roll the intro and get right into our adventure for the day. Definitely in the Midwest. Everything's green. Cool tractor. There's Kit. It's a farm stand with lots of fruits and veggies. We're gonna go see what they've got. Come on, Kit. Gotta love all the old implements and stuff too. Check that out. Very cool. Oh, look at the basil.
Over again, make sure I don't forget anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Look at that. You got peaches and cabbage. All kinds of stuff. Alright, so I'm standing here with Harry. This is the third Fort Wayne, which was active from
1816 to 1819.
Yeah, so only 3 years. So he's just given us an amazing tour. And this is actually, he's given us an amazing tour, which you're going to see in a little bit. But Harry, you've been doing this for how long, doing these tours?
I started volunteering here at the fort when I was 13, and I am now 22, so it's
wow.
been 9 years. And this is actually my third year as a summer intern, being down here giving tours, 40 hours a week all summer. So.
And so what is it about working here at the fort that really strikes you, that made you interested in doing this?
Yeah, what makes me really interested in doing this, my passion for history and talking to people, especially when it comes to Fort Wayne, is, I love when people walk into this place and they say, oh, I've lived in Fort Wayne all my life and I've never come here, I really like to teach people the history of the land that they're standing on, how this place was colonized and how any non-Native Americans ended up here in the first place, right?
Awesome. Well, you're doing a really fine job. I want to thank you for an excellent tour. That was really worthwhile.
Thank you.
And if you're in the Fort Wayne area, you may or may not get Harry as your tour guide, but I'd certainly suggest getting out here and checking out the third Fort Wayne.
Anthony Wayne had done to them in 1794, right? And now they're also allied with the British, who we're at war with, so they're well within their means to come attack the fort. Ultimately, once again, roughly 1,500 Native Americans attacked Fort Wayne. The siege lasted about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks or so. Ultimately, Fort Wayne held. There was only one American casualty in the siege. He was the man outside gardening when the attack began.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty important that Fort Wayne did not fall historically, because Fort Detroit, and of course what is today Detroit, Michigan, had just been taken by the British, and Fort Dearborn in what is today Chicago, Illinois, was just burned to the ground by the Potawatomi tribe. So had Fort Wayne fallen, we might have, had Fort Wayne fallen in that September 1812 siege, we might be standing in Canada today, right? So it's pretty important that the fort held. Then finally, the War of 1812 ended. Second Fort Wayne is now 15 years old. It had withstood this major siege. It was pretty worn down, so the army decommissioned it and built what we're seeing right now. This is a replica of the third and final Fort Wayne, which stood from 1816 to 1819. It was only here for 3 years for a couple of reasons. First of all, the War of 1812 ended, right? There's no more combat, no one left to fight. Second of all, Indiana gained statehood in 1816. So once we were a state, the army didn't really have a reason to be here, and they moved farther westward. So after these buildings were decommissioned, the residents of Fort Wayne stole the timbers to build their own houses. They did not stick around very long. There's actually only one photograph of this fort, and in that photo, only one half of this building is standing. It's missing the roof and the chimneys. That photo was taken in 1852, so in only 33 years, pretty much all of these buildings were gone.
Wow.
It's only 6 beds. We would have a minimum of 12, and in full capacity, up to 18 men assigned to each barracks room. So there'd be 2 or 3 guys sleeping in every mattress, right?
Wow. Then they're not that big.
Yeah, well, luckily, not everyone uses the bed at the same time.
Oh, so they're
right?
doing shifts.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Someone has to be awake to protect the fort 24/7. So if you guys could imagine between 10 and 20 men on it, right? Let's say there's 20 people on your guard shift. 10 of them would be in this room. 10 of them are outside protecting the fort, and then they switch places halfway through, right? We did that mostly because of the winter. Obviously, it's cold here in Indiana, so you can come inside to keep warm. So while you're in this room, you're still on guard duty, which means you have to have on your full uniform, all of your equipment. You can't take any of it off. And of course, you're never allowed to sleep on guard duty, right? But you are allowed to lay down, which is why these beds do not have mattresses. The Army called these laying tables, so you can lay down to rest your back, right? But let's say you're a bad soldier. Let's say you do fall asleep on guard duty. Well, the Army's gonna punish you, right? Yeah. So this is a stocks, also called a pillory. Obviously, I'm sure you've seen this in an old movie or something. Pretty straightforward. Another common punishment was being shackled to the flagpole for a few hours. Or probably the worst punishment at this time in the U.S. Army is called the wooden horse. It's exactly what it sounds like. A man would be forced to sit on top of a wooden sawhorse. Then they would tie a 6-pound cannonball to each one of his legs and allow him to, sit there and reflect on his actions for a few hours.
That sounds painful.
Yeah, so it was a pretty brutal time to be an enlisted man in the military. So in essence, they are the great bridge between worlds. In the Army, there's the privates, right, who are the brawn. They do all of the heavy lifting and things. And then there are the officers, who are the brain. They do all of the thinking, okay? The sergeants is how these two things communicate with each other, right? So all of the sergeants would sleep in this room for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're easy to find. If an officer wants something done, he can't just go walk into the barracks and tell the privates. No. He has to come in here to get a sergeant to go walk into the barracks to tell the privates. The other reason all of the sergeants sleep in here is the sergeant's number one job is to make sure the fort is always protected, right? Make sure that we're always under guard, which is why they sleep attached to the guard room. If one of the sergeants ever needs something from one of those guards, you can just throw open the door, right?
Now, were the sergeants tripled up in Bunstill?
Great question. The sergeants, they get some privilege with rank. Probably the biggest one is you no longer share your bed. The sergeants also will make more money. They make $10 a month or so, as opposed to a private's $5 a month. And lastly, big important difference is you have to know how to read and write to be a sergeant, right? Not necessarily everyone here at the fort is literate.
Right. And so what constitutes a junior officer?
Great question. If you're an officer, but you're lower ranking than the commander of the fort, that is where you live, right? This is your home. So each man would have one room to himself to share with his family, right? If you're an enlisted man over in the barracks, you're technically allowed to bring your family here to Fort Wayne, but there's a pretty big catch, okay? No matter how many people you brought, the Army would only give you one half of one bed, and the Army would only give you your day's food, and that is it. Okay?
Wow.
So only 2 out of the 60 enlisted men at Fort Wayne ended up bringing their families here to the fort, and those families would have slept on the floor of the barracks, surrounded by the rest of the men, and they would have had to, in essence, beg for food to get by. An officer's family over here, though, has a pretty comfortable life, right? All of these officers would be independently wealthy, so they can afford just buying, extra food and clothing and furniture. And also, the officers are allowed to leave the fort alone, right? They can walk out into the village and trade. They can go hunting in their free time for extra food or better food, right? If you're an enlisted man, you're pretty much never allowed to leave the fort alone. It's pretty simple. if you were to give, you know, a private in the army a rifle and a knapsack full of supplies and say, go get a deer, he would never come back, right?
Right.
He would leave the army. The officers have a nice enough life that they actually come home at the end of the day.
So with all the extra rooms, does that, I mean, if they were bringing family, could they then expand their space?
Yeah, exactly. So the room we just walked into is probably one of the most important rooms here at Fort Wayne. This is the Indian agent's room, okay? So the Indian agent at our fort was a man named Major Benjamin Franklin Stickney. Major Stickney is here to represent the United States in trade dealings, right, with Native Americans. So going all the way back to the very early 1700s, when the French first got here, they were the first Europeans to colonize this area. When the French were here, they were trading mostly for beaver fur, right? They wanted fur trade. By the time Stickney is here in 1816, the fur trade is kind of coming to a close. What Stickney is really after is land, okay? Obviously, if you could imagine, Major Stickney is not a very popular person amongst the Miami tribe, right? We had just finished fighting 2 wars against these people. They were not very happy that we even built a 3rd Fort Wayne, and now here comes Major Stickney asking you for your land. He was actually almost stabbed during a trade dealing, you know, because of all of these tensions, right? Stickney, the man himself, was known to be a bit of an eccentric. He was kind of an oddball. For example, he had 2 sons. He named his firstborn son 1, and he named his second-born son 2. Yeah, initially he thought 1 and 2 could choose their own names as they got older, but the boys grew attached and kept the names 1 and 2 their whole life. This table is also set in here, which demonstrates a period of a few months where Major Stickney refused to speak to our commander, Major John Whistler. So Stickney took all of his meals alone in his room, and there was a designated runner every day to go from this room just over there to the commander's quarters and back again, right? Ultimately, Whistler won the fight. He was, after all, you know, the commander of the fort, and Stickney kind of got off his high horse. But anyway, this is the commander's quarters. Once again, we are currently at the 3rd Fort Wayne, right? So Anthony Wayne was dead by the time our fort was built. Our commander was a man named Major John Whistler. Major Whistler had a very long military career. He actually started in the British Army and then switched sides to the American Army following the Revolutionary War. During the War of 1812, he was the superintendent of forts, which means he had some role to play in pretty much all of the wooden forts that at one time were in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, right? So he was a pretty important man. His post here was his retirement post. This was his last stint in the army. He would have been in his 60s while he was commanding this fort. So the room we're in right now is the officer's dining room. If you're an officer, you don't cook your own meals, right? Someone else will do it for you. You just come in here to enjoy lunch and dinner every day. This is also Major Whistler's office. So this is where Major Whistler would be throughout the day. Like I mentioned earlier, Whistler was the superintendent of forts. He had designed a lot of these places. There's a lot of attention to detail that went into the design of this fort. One of my favorite details is this is Whistler's office, right? If you look out Major Whistler's window, you can see we are perfectly in line with the front gate. Whistler can see anybody coming or leaving his fort without having to get up, right? So it's pretty ingenious design. This is the officer's kitchen. So Major Whistler had 2 cooks that he brought with him here to Fort Wayne. Both of his cooks were actually German, and they did not speak much English, so they would have had a pretty lonely time here at the fort. Usually I'm asked, you know, where do the cooks sleep? They most likely would have slept in the kitchen. Yeah, they would have just pulled out a bedroll and slept on the floor at the end of the day. Once again, these cooks are also just for the officers. The enlisted men have to do their own cooking and all of their own cleaning.
And this is the first one that has a mantle.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
I don't know entirely why that is.
I'm guessing it's to keep the cooking implements close to the fire,
It could be.
which they wouldn't be able to do by nailing into the brick very easily.
No, not very easily. Some of our fireplaces, this one doesn't have any, but some of them actually have pegs set into the mortar for hanging things on. What I do know about, how a fireplace works is the mantle actually helps suck heat outwards into the room. Because
That
it
makes
creates,
sense.
in essence, a small shelf of cold air above, which pulls hot air up and out. So if you guys want, you can read this, but that is your daily ration as a soldier, right? So each man would get that amount of food every day, right? In addition to what you see there, you would also get some fresh vegetables from the garden. The garden that we have growing today is less than a quarter of the size of what would have been here 200 years ago, right? And then in the winter time, you might also get some dried beans or dried squash from the year before, right?
Who tended the garden? Did the soldiers?
The soldiers did. So the average day of a soldier, you get 8 hours of sleep, you wake up, you go on an 8-hour guard shift, then you spend another 8 hours cooking, cleaning, chopping firewood, repairing the fort, tending to the garden, right? There's a lot of things to get done at this place, and pretty much all of it gets done by the privates, right? Anyway, so this is also the largest fireplace in the fort simply because it has to feed the most men. All 65 enlisted men get 2 meals a day prepared in here. The way that cooking would work is obviously you can't fit 60 guys in this room and all expect them to cook, right? So you would be assigned to a mess squad. It's a group of 6 people. Every day you pick one of them to cook for the other 5, right? So at any given time you would have about 6 to 8 or so men cooking in this room.
Still pretty crowded.
Yeah, still pretty crowded, obviously. In addition to being the enlisted man's kitchen, this is also your operating room, okay? Yeah, these white walls are to reflect candlelight so the surgeon can see what he's doing, right? Luckily, this third Fort Wayne was never attacked. No surgeries were performed here, but if need be, this is where it would have happened. Another reason this building is called the hospital is the room right above us. We are currently standing underneath the quarantine ward. So in the winter of 1816, there was an outbreak of smallpox here at the fort. At the time, they believed in the miasma theory, which is the idea that disease is spread through bad smells, bad air, right? So they thought by putting all the sick men upstairs, all of those bad smells would waft upwards and away. But in reality, their smallpox scabs and germs fell downwards into the food of the rest of the men at the fort.
Wow.
Yeah, so the smallpox spread pretty quickly in the winter of 1816.
Surprised anybody lived.
Yeah.
We actually did, for this time period especially, we did really well. Part of the reason why not many of the privates, the men in the army, died is actually because they were older than we would imagine. The average age of a private at this third Fort Wayne is about 30, okay?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these guys would have joined the army, back around the year 1800 or so. It's a 2-year enlistment. You think, this will be great, they'll feed me, they'll pay me, sure. Most of them are from Philadelphia, so you join the army in Philadelphia, right? They ship you out to Indiana. Your 2 years are up, you think, okay, ready to go home now. The army says, okay, that's fine, you can leave. We'll need our gun back, we'll need our uniform back, and you can march half-clothed and unarmed all the way back to Philadelphia, right? No one took them up on it. Most of these guys ended up being stuck here for 10, 15, in some cases even 20 years.
Wow.
Right? But this has to do with the smallpox because it means most of them would have had smallpox at some point in their life, right? So they were more immune than the average soldier in the army, so.
Interesting.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, and always remember to sally forth, live your best life, go out and adventure in whatever way works for you.